Jeremy Banks. Jeremy Banks strikes a chord. Jeremy Banks should strike a chord. Jeremy Banks goes to the Bucs. So, is Jeremy Banks a VFL? Will you root for Jeremy Banks after what happened in the Columbia collapse of 2022? When he was a big part of it, when he missed a practice the Monday or a team function, a Monday before the South Carolina game. And then there was an altercation with Joe Milton because Hendon Hooker, I was told that it had to do with stepping on the tee, which Banks was just basically reacting to the fact that he might be suspended on Saturday, that he was in trouble. And I think the entire defense felt they were overlooked because the offense was so good. Nevertheless, by all accounts, Jeremy Banks acted selfishly and out of line, and that led to the Columbia collapse. Will you root for him? Should Tennessee fans root for him?
No, and I'll tell you why. I'll tell you exactly why. How he responded at the pro day interviews about it. Or it was at the pro day or the combine where he was like, there was no reason for me to not be out there with my brothers and my teammates with South Carolina. Basically, all but saying Josh Heupel did him dirty, keeping him out of that game, and that he wanted to go to battle with his brothers. If you wanted to go to battle with your brothers, you shouldn't be trying to break their face in the weeks leading up to practice, and you shouldn't have to have another quarterback hold you back from fighting them, and you shouldn't be skipping practice in November when a college football playoff berth is on the line. I'm sorry. Jeremy Banks has no remorse for what he did, totally thinks that he was in the right, cost Tennessee a shot at the playoff. Yeah, and by the way, this is why he wasn't drafted. He would have been a 5th to 7th round pick. Let's be honest. And Dave, you and I know this as well as anybody. I don't need any source to tell me this. I just know straight up Josh Heupel sandbagged him at the pro day interviews and pulled the scouts to the side and said, and told every dirty detail about Jeremy Banks.
I don't think that's sandbagging. I think that's being honest.
When I say, you're right, I don't mean sandbag in a negative way. I think Heupel straight up had no problem saying everything negative about Jeremy Banks and was the reason Jeremy Banks wasn't drafted, because I think everybody heard what Heupel, I think a lot of scouts heard what Heupel said about Jeremy Banks. And he did it to himself, and I'm totally pro Josh Heupel doing that, by the way.
Okay, so you won't root for him. And you don't think Tennessee fans should root for him. I'm going to say that you should root for him because in 3 years, the average, not Tennessee fan, but the average NFL fan, the average, more importantly, prospect that is in high school watches Jeremy Banks and he says, man, that guy didn't even get drafted. Now he's a Pro Bowler in the NFL. I don't think he's going to be, but if he is, then that just helps Tennessee. All of this comes down to what you should care about other than your emotional feelings about these players. You should root for them to all do well because it helps Tennessee in recruiting.
I will tell you why it will not help Tennessee. And you want me to tell you why?
Okay. All right. I'm interested.
I'm basing this off what you've told me, by the way. You told me about how Fulmer sandbagged Jason Witten, and that was a sandbag, like an unfair sandbag where he just threw him under the bus because he was mad that he didn't come back for his senior year. And there is no doubt in my mind that Jason Witten going on to be successful in the NFL killed Fulmer's credibility with recruiting. And I think it came out. So if Heupel, who I think had everything to do with Jeremy Banks not getting drafted, if Jeremy Banks is successful and goes to the Pro Bowl, word's going to get out like, hey man, this guy was undrafted because of what Heupel said about him, and look at how good he is. What do you think he's going to say about you?
Man, that's a good argument, Caleb. I've been doing this for a while, and that may be the best argument you've ever had. Okay, but if he's wrong on one guy, if Heupel ends up being wrong on one guy, and I think both of us think that the chances are Jeremy Banks is going to continue his jerkitude in the pros and not be a great pro, right? Do we both agree on that?
Okay, by the way, he has severe limitations physically already. So, I mean, just on the field.
I think if you're Josh Heupel and you're 1-10 of being wrong about guys when you talk to scouts, I think you're okay. But you do bring up a great point. If he goes on to be the next great linebacker, then yes, then that makes Heupel not look so great. but I don't think that's going to happen. Travis says he wasn't that good to begin with. How good was he in retrospect? If you want to go back 2 years ago, if you want to go back to 2021, coming out of that season, I thought he was on the verge of being a playmaker, maybe not superstar, but standout in the SEC. He wasn't even the best linebacker on his team. Beasley was. So how good is he just as a player? Forget about as a dude and as a teammate. How good is he? And J. Mac Vols says, how do you know Heupel said negative things about Banks based off speculation? Well, we don't know, but if he was honest based off what we've reported and feel solid about it, and Jimmy Himes was on the program and reported too, if he was just honest, then he didn't have anything great to say about him about the South Carolina thing. So
anyone from being invited to the combine to not being drafted, and actually being on the all combine team, which suggests that during the pro day interviews, somebody said something about him.
Yes. And he came across as bad, which you pointed out earlier. So, it's hard for me to think poorly of someone that did give their all, so to speak. But how good is Jeremy Banks just as a player in your mind?
I think Jeremy Banks is a very good run stopper, but I think he's very situational. And so he can never be a starter in the NFL linebacker. It's not going to happen. He's so I said this when I was still defending his character. I thought he had turned a corner after the arrest. I was wrong. But even when I thought he had, I was very, very suspicious of him as a pro prospect because of how awful he was in pass coverage. I mean, he gave up a touchdown to Pittsburgh early last year. The way he got lost in coverage was one of the most embarrassing things I've ever seen for a linebacker. So I think that Jeremy Banks he's a run stopper, and that's it. And he's athletic enough to where if a coach says, hey, run through the gap's going to be in this part of the line and run through that gap, he can do it.
Yeah, he's also to some extent a sideline to sideline run stopper. I think he has the physical ability of that. So sometimes when we say run stoppers, we kind of think like a Mike Singletary who plays between the tackles. I do think he can get sideline to sideline. I question his coverage ability. And of course, it's very fair to question his character.
And in this NFL, linebackers have to be able to cover. They've spread the field so much now.
Yeah. I mean, how's he going to do against Amendola or one of these slot guys that are all over you and finding holes in zones and that are incredibly athletic, quick, shifty? Bassey Lawn and Garden, man alive, it's worth the drive. Bassey Lawn and Garden, whether you're in Nashville, Knoxville, or Chattanooga, they're in Cleveland, Tennessee. They've got your industrial mowers, they've got your commercial mowers, and they also have residential mowers. If you're restocking the fleet for your business, or perhaps you are starting up a new business, Bassey Lawn and Garden, go to Bassey.com. That's Bassey.com, and you will be well taken care of, as their buying power will save you thousands and thousands of dollars. That's Bassey Lawn and Garden, man alive. It's worth the drive. Travis says, we know he was never an Al Wilson. No.
That's so blasphemous to even bring Al Wilson up. Like, there's like 100 linebackers between Al Wilson and Jeremy Banks, maybe 500 Tennessee linebackers between Al Wilson and Jeremy Banks.